Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon. If you could possibly just type in a chat where you are from, where you're joining from, who you are, what you're hoping to get out of this session, so I can just give you a couple of minutes for all of you to join in. I can see obviously more people joining in, so it would be lovely to see in the chat who you are, where you're coming from. Say hello. Okay, let me also know if you can hear me. Oh, yes, I can see some already appearing. Excellent. Hello. Okay. Oh, hello from Watford. Okay, brilliant. Cambridge, Essex, Bournemouth. Okay. Oh, Kyrgyzstan. Wow. Excellent. Wow. Turkey, Istanbul, London, Thailand. Wow. Brighton, Essex. What an amazing audience. Oh, hi. Hi, Joe. Lovely to see you here. Wakefield, Moscow. Wow. Switzerland, Cheshire, Lancashire, Essex, Yorkshire. Wow. Excellent. Lovely to see all of you. I can see some names look familiar. Some names are brand new. Surrey, New Delhi. Oh, Ely, Cambridgeshire, London. Lovely. Surrey, London, Peterborough. Lovely to see you all here. Thank you for joining, especially on Saturday. Cambridgeshire. Okay, can I give another maybe minute or so and then I'll make a start. Hello, Brentwood. Excellent. Okay, lovely to see you here. Oh. London, Northampton. Hello, everyone. Yes, lovely. Hampshire. Fantastic. Okay, I will let you keep joining in. I will start sharing my presentation in a second, just to explain to you, because obviously I don't know whether you have joined the language show in the past, but I haven't got a moderator, so I won't be able to keep an eye on the chat and present at the same time. So what I would like to ask you is, if you have any questions, if you could please put them into the Q&A section, so I can then look at them at the end of the session. My idea is that I will be talking maybe for 30-35 minutes, and then I'm going to give you 10 minutes towards the end, chance to ask any questions. So if I start sharing my screen with you, well, look, hopefully you can see my screen. Yes. Okay, so today's session will be on applying Rosenstein principles in languages classroom. I will be sharing with you my own experience, my own journey in my own school, how we have obviously implemented it in our classroom. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a subject leader, and I have been a subject leader for quite a while now. I've got 17 years of teaching experience in secondary sector. I'm also SLE, research lead, a GCSE examiner, a fellow of Chartered College of Teaching, and I'm also a member of the AWL Council. Now, if you are on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter under Sylvia4. I also write an educational blog, Frau Basto MFL, where I share regularly ideas about teaching and learning foreign languages, about pedagogy, evidence-informed practice. So feel free to check it out. You've got the QR code, which you can just scan, or you can just email me. Okay, so looking at the focus of this session. So what I will be looking at in this session, first of all, look at memory and how our memory works. I think it is important that we take into account the limitations of memory, especially working memory, when it comes to learning, and also to understand our students a little bit better, because we have gone through the same experience as learners, whether we are, students as in the school or adult learners. I will also look at how learning happens, and then specifically at the application of the 10 principles of instruction in language teaching, and I will share also some concrete examples with you. Okay, so first of all, looking at memory. Now, memory is complex, and without memory, we could not learn anything. So it is an important factor in learning that we have to consider as professionals. it is important for us teachers because we spend a lot of our working time trying to help our students to remember what they have learned. We are always on a hunt to find ways how we can make the learning easy for our students, how we can help them to make links so they can remember the vocabulary, the structures, and then they can obviously retrieve it. So it is important that we are aware of how memory works, but also maybe share it simplified with our students, which I often do. I do share with my students, how the memory works, so they understand the rationale behind it, because often students perceive languages as difficult, and they also think that they are difficult because their memory is not very good. They think their memory is not great, and I think they need to understand that that's not just the case for them, that we all at times struggle with remembering things. So looking at memory, although there are many competing models about how memory works, most cognitive psychologists believe in the so-called multi-store or multi-component model of memory. And the most one referred to is the Atkinson-Shiffrin multi-store model of memory, which they shared in 1968 first time. And that comprised from the sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. So when we talk about sensory memory, is really talking about how we process the input. So input is basically the knowledge we're trying to learn. So they talked about 5 ways the sensory memory works. So we're processing input through images, so the sight, sounds, smell, taste, but also through touch, so the physical sensations. And then we obviously process it in our working memory, and we are hoping to store it in long-term memory. So if you look specifically at the working memory multi-store model, the most referred to is the Baddeley's multi-store model of working memory. This comprises from central executive, which is a little bit like the contactor who controls or manages all of this process. And again, the input comes through either visual spatial sketchpad. That means that we're talking about the visual semantics, so the images and the space consciously held in our mind. So we're talking about the flashcards, or maybe the spelling, the classroom screen. Then we got the episodic buffer, which kind of regulates the flow of the information. Or we can also process the input that's incoming through the phonological loop. And that means we're talking about the incoming speech, so the language that we hear. And this is then held and processed in the auditory storage area. So this is very simplified. I mean, we can go really into quite details about the memory, but I'm conscious of the time, and we want to also look at the, obviously, Rosensham's principles, which is the main theme of the presentation. Now, if you're interested in memory, an excellent book I can recommend is really Smith and Conti's memory book, which is written very comprehensively, and it's very easy to read and understand. So looking at the components on the long-term memory, now this one is referring to the Squire model, which talks about the declarative memory and the procedural memory. So declarative memory is the explicit memory, so the one which we are trying to remember something consciously. So it could be episodic through the experiences, or semantic, when it's basically literally learning the vocabulary or learning the telephone numbers. So this is very conscious. And then we have the procedural memory, which is implicit. So it's skills and habits. So for example, I don't know, learning how to ride a bike or remembering how to ride a bike. The priming, so we are exposed to something and we remember it because of the exposure and being exposed to it and seeing it. So it's not necessarily consciously trying to remember it. So this is really in a nutshell about memory. Now, how does memory work? As mentioned previously, memory and learning are very closely connected, okay? And memory and the strength of our memory really affects how much we can retain and how quickly we learn something. And often the students who might be sent do struggle with, the working memory span. It might be more limited. So if we think about what influences memory, obviously is the environment. Then information comes into the working memory, and we are hoping to store it in long-term memory. So attention through the environment enters the working memory. We hope we rehearse, we practice. If we don't practice and rehearse, the information gets lost. So through the rehearsal and the practice, it gets encoded and it gets stored into long-term memory. Now, if we want to store and practice because we want to be able to retrieve that knowledge from long-term memory back into the working memory. Now, some information, even in long-term memory, will be lost over time. That's inevitable. So when we talk about our classroom environment, well, the environment for us as teachers is the classroom. And it is quite important to make sure that we ensure our students focus, that it's these high levels of focus and concentration and attention, the good study habits. So making sure that there is an environment where learning can happen, but also making sure that we keep it simple, that we keep the instruction simple, so we avoid the cognitive overload. Because often students, if we introduce too much to them, it's just like a bottleneck. If it's too much, what happens? Information overspills and knowledge gets lost. Now, working memory, as mentioned previously, is a very limited cognitive system. So we've got very limited capacity. It is there in the moment, and really we can retain anywhere between 3 to 5 chunks. So if we talk about vocabulary, that could be 3 to 5 words. But if you think about maybe learning words and vocabulary structure in sentences, that it could be up to 5 simple sentences to remember. And that can be held in our memory, the information, for about 18 to 30 seconds. It gets processed in a working memory, and it needs to be processed, so it can then get stored into long-term memory. So again, the cognitive overload will lead to the information loss. So the small steps, the chunking is important, but also building on the prior knowledge. So maybe hooking the new learning onto something students already learned before. So let's say students have learned past tense, I don't know, in autumn in a specific topic, and then it comes up again hooking it. Well, we've learned the structures, we know the principle of the tense, we might have a new content, new vocabulary, but they will be, hopefully, if we do retrieval practice quite often, if we retrieve the prior knowledge, they will be able to make the links, and it makes it easier then to remember when it comes to the new learning. And long-term memory, obviously, is a vast store of knowledge with unlimited capacity. It holds information in schemas. Now, sometimes I've heard people referring to it like, well, it's like a computer. Well, not exactly. I would not exactly describe it as a computer. We don't store information in files somewhere, but we do store information in schemas and schematas, and anytime we retrieve information, we build new links, and these links get stronger. So that's how the long-term memory works. So I would not necessarily call it a computer system, storage system, so it's not exactly the same. But we can obviously retrieve information back from the working memory when needed. And again, it still builds on the prior knowledge and the experiences that we have. Well, when obviously students learn, and when we teach also, we have to bear in mind the forgetting curve. Students leave our lesson and we feel, wow, they really got it, they understand it. And I have, quite a few colleagues say, well, then they come the next lesson 3 days later, and it's like, I have never taught it. And we feel often disheartened about it, but we forget that, yes, as soon as the students leave, or even us, if we learn something new and we don't revisit it, it gets forgotten. We have to also bear in mind that our students go to maths, English, science, and they have lots of new knowledge there they have to remember. So again, that information can get quite easily lost because they have a lot to remember. So bearing in mind the cognitive overload and the forgetting curve is important, but obviously being able to retrieve this knowledge over and over again, then this forgetting curve hopefully gets less steep and less steep over the time. So explaining this to students and explain how it works is important. I mean, not long ago, I had a parents' evening, and as I was telling my parents, which really sounded a bit paradox, because often teachers complain that students don't do homework. Now, I was telling to my parents that I'm going to be complaining that my students do homework too soon, because often many of them end up doing their homework on a day when we had a lesson, which is admirable, because either they are so keen or they just want to have it done, which probably is the second case. But if they leave it, because often we don't have lessons for 3-4 days, some of them, it might be up to 5 days. I don't know how big the spans between your lessons are in your school, because you might have, I don't know if you're primary or in another type of school, you might have maybe a lesson only once a week, or big gaps in between. So we almost want them to get it before we start retrieving it. So I said to them, I want you to do it a day or 2 days before you have your lesson, so it's fresh and it's revisited. So when you come to lesson, you know it. So, as mentioned before, learning is, it's complex. It's difficult, and it does mean that we have to change things in long-term memory, because if nothing changed, nothing has been learned. And I really like this quote from Kirshner, Svelle, and Clark. I mean, for us in language learning, really, we aim to combine the knowledge and the skill to build a proficiency. So for us, the input, the practice, but also the retrieval is really key. When we look at how learning happens, we've got the encoding stage, which is the input, and it's extremely important because that's how information gets in, and that's how we absorb the knowledge. But in the past, I have used or have spent a lot of time on input and maybe not as much on practice, and I have moved my students too quickly into production phase, which led to students feeling, oh, I can't do that. So we have changed quite a lot how we approach teaching of languages and how much we spend actually on the practice and rehearsal stage. So input is extremely important, but it's not just all about input, it's about making sure that we practice. So once the information is encoded and we have practiced it, we hope that it sticks around. So we talk about the storage, and essentially one of the most important things is also then the output, the retrieval. Actually, students being able to bring this previously learned knowledge into mind and use it. We want them to be able to use that information, the vocabulary, the structures, when actually they need to either speak or they need to write. So that's important to consider. We're looking at the Rothenstein's principle of instruction now in specific detail. Why is it so important? Why is it so talked about in schools, but also on social media? Well, it is based on evidence from cognitive science. It's based on research of master teachers and research on cognitive supports. So when we look at them individually, there are 10 of them. Now, beginning your lessons with a short review of previous learning. I personally don't think this is anything new in language teaching. It might be different for other subjects. I don't know how much other subject may be reviewed or revisit previous learning. With language, the way language works is cumulative. So often one lesson builds on another lesson. So for us, it is important that our students refresh what they have learned previous lesson. So in my school, we have always done some kind of a review, whether it was a vocabulary test or it was a start activity or a do now task, or whatever you want to call it. We use a lot of retrieval practice now, making sure that it's spaced, interleaved, and then we also provide feedback, because that aids students' metacognition. They need to know what they don't know. What was different is that we often used the vocabulary testing. It was really testing, and it was quite stressful. So the difference now is with using, for example, retrieval practice, specifically in my school, is that it is low stakes. So it's not really threatening the students. It's really to aid their learning and their self-efficacy in a sense, because yes, you will make mistakes, you know what you don't know, but then you can act on it. And to ensure that I, as a teacher, know still how my students are doing, we use a lot mini whiteboards. So often when they do a type of retrieval practice, they would then write their scores on mini whiteboards and show me, and I just make a note mentally of students who maybe haven't done that great, and I make a note of it in my planner for later on. And if that is something which is kind of repetitive, then I would have a conversation, what's going on. If you look at the example of the review of the retrieval practice that we use, for example, in our school, we use quite a few different things. Now, these were all inspired by Kate Jones, who I'm sure you know is a guru of retrieval practice in the UK. And few of these templates have been collated by the learning linguist. So you can see a retrieval roulette at the top, which has been designed by Adam Boxer, who is a science teacher. I think he's the head of science, and he basically designed a spreadsheet. So at the start, it might be a little bit laborsome, because obviously you have to put, your chunks, your vocabulary, your sentences in. But once they are there, you can use them over and over again. And the spreadsheet's got a formula that when you click on the F9 key on your computer keyboard, it will generate a new quiz every time. So it mixes it up for you. You can mix topics, you can mix units, and it just mixes it up for you. So you don't have to think about creating new tests. It's got lots of different games. You can play blockbusters and Connect 4 there as well. And it just gives you also instant answers. He has just recently, well, I think last year, it's been launched a platform called Carousel Learning, which is pretty good as well, because it gives you also the analysis of how your students are performing if you wanted to go into details and you like your data. Other you can see is either retrieval challenge grids, or you can see the retrieval, ritual pyramids. You can see that they are color coded because they are based on how difficult they are. So obviously, you know, with the color coding, you know, there are simpler questions, so it's scaffolded for your students who might struggle, and then you have more complex questions, which would be obviously for the students who need maybe challenge. You've got your 5 a day. You've got some ritual questions. Again, they are color coded because it's different kind of difficulty. So again, providing scaffolding for the students who might find it, you know, difficult, easier tasks or questions, and then more challenging questions, or the linking knowledge. I'm just looking that I've got some people in chat, just quickly. Oh, okay. Right, okay, excellent. So just checking, because as I said, I haven't got anybody to keep an eye on what's going on. So moving on, oops, something got frozen. Not moving. Oh, there we go. Principle 2, presenting materials in small steps with student practice after each other. Now, chunking is such a big word. Everybody uses chunking nowadays. I think, again, for us as language teachers, that's not a revelation, because we know that we can't give students too much. It has to be broken down, it has to be modeled, it has to be practiced. You know, modeling, whether you use a visualizer or whether you use, you know, recordings, listening pyramids. Modeling is a key in language learning, because often we have to model pronunciation. So, you know, our students, in order to process anything, they need to have awareness of the phonology. You know, they need to understand how the phonics work and match up the phonics to the marks they see in the writing. So the graphemes, they need to practice making the sounds. We have been recently using sentence builders and the Conti's EPI methodology, which seems to work really well for our school. I know that there are other schools using different methodologies, such as parallel text and knowledge organizers, but sentence builders seem to be working really well for us. So students find them really quite accessible. And also they are, in a sense, also modeling, because, you know, you have already the structures there. So they can already see how the language works. And often, when they learn the structures, you know, the grammar is then taught as a pop-up grammar. So looking at the second principle, breaking things down, chunking, you know, using lots of modeling to make students practice and be confident with pronunciation. Asking a large amount of questions and check for responses of all students. I think one of the cheapest way is really mini whiteboards. I don't think I can live without my mini whiteboards. They are so easy to use. And so accessible, and you can see immediately what your students know, what they don't know, rather than just, you know, picking maybe 1 or 2 students who put their hand up. So I often ask questions, whether it is giving an answer to a question, or whether it is spelling, or whether it is a translation. You know, asking students to show their answers on a mini board, you can scan the room immediately, and you can see immediately who is performing well and who is maybe struggling. The key with the use of mini whiteboards is to remember that, you know, ask students to show your boards when you want them to show, because otherwise it turns into competition, or, you know, you have students looking and maybe copying off each other. So I always instruct my students, ask them the question, I tell them, please do not show me your boards until I ask you to show me your boards, and then they ideally, you know, show the boards simultaneously. Cold calling or no opt-out is also brilliant, because often we know we have students who can take over our lesson in, you know, very quickly, because they know everything and they want to show everything. And then we have often students who are capable, but maybe shy or not as confident, and they are hiding, and they often get missed. So with cold calling, when I ask students, don't put your hand up, I will ask who I want to answer. That's absolutely brilliant. But for this to work, really, you need to make sure that students are confident and at ease, that making mistakes during this learning process is okay. that it's not about I have to get it right because otherwise I will be in trouble. So making sure that the environment in the classroom is where students feel secure to do that, and give them also the option of saying, well, I don't know the answer yet, but you know, I will learn, I will listen to somebody else, and I will repeat. So with the cold calling, one thing to remember is really ask the question, give a little bit of thinking time, and then call the name. Because if you say the name first, the rest of the class stops listening because they know, I don't know, Mary or John is answering, and then they off the hook. Also, when they say, I don't know the answer yet, make sure that you tell them, okay, that's fine. Listen, at some point later on in the lesson, I'll come back to you and I will check that you know the answer. So that makes the students to listen to their peers for the answer. Say it again better, think per share. Again, you know, rephrasing your sentence, you extend your sentence. Check for understanding, you know, so when we look at process questions, well, why did you use this? Why did you not use that? Why did you put the words in this word order? Why did you use that auxiliary verb and not that? So again, checking that they understand the processes behind it as well. Excellent use is also, you could use wheel of names. I know that there are quite a few people who use wheel of names, and during the lockdown, you know, the mini whiteboards, or when the spiral AC was still working, that was a brilliant platform to use as well. Principle provide models and worked examples. I think we do that in languages all the time, you know, providing models, worked examples, showing how to construct sentences, showing how to say something. So I say it first, you say it afterwards. I start the sentence, can you finish the sentence? This could be also scaffolded, you know, students will still use maybe sentence builders, but remember the scaffolding needs to be then gradually taken away. Break the flow, so they have some sentences, can they actually break the flow as you say the words, as you read the words, spotting the mistakes. Things like delayed copying is quite good as well, and dictations, deconstructions of texts. I will show you in a minute some examples, what a good one looks like. Listening pyramids, I think we'll use loads of these, so it's not something we have to think about reinventing brand new. So you can do the text analysis. So again, this is, for example, 90-word task I would use with my students, an example, and then I would ask them to give examples of connectives, of adjectives, opinion phrases, so the students understand what they need to include. And that's again based on Conti, you know, for example, the oral ping pong activity, and then the text analysis that was inspired by Morgan MFL, who has shared this, I think, possibly on her blog, on one of her webinars. So really, you know, excellent way of breaking down as well for the students. So guided practice, you know, practicing new material. I think guided practice and modeling is really hand in hand with me, goes in hand with me. So spot the errors, spot the difference, translations. So again, you can put a lot of scaffolding in there if you have students who are maybe not so confident. So there is a variety of translations like tangled translation, honeycomb translation, sentence puzzles, you know, narrow listenings and reading activities, one pen, one dice translation. So there is a lot we can guide our students. We can model, you know, and help them to achieve. So, for example, on the translation, you can see the tangled translation. It's been around for quite a while, but this template, I really like it. It was shared with by Eve Mullen, I think, on Twitter last year at some point. I just like that layout because I think it's cognitively more friendly, because it's kind of like on the side. And then you have more challenging honeycomb translation, which was shared by Esther Mercier, where I would give this to my more able students, for example. You know, they are provided with the first letter of the word, but then again, it's chunked. So it's almost like solving a puzzle. It gives them a little bit of work to do before we just give them the text. Also, what is good to consider, sometimes students find a text, translation text, when they see it as a paragraph, much harder. So often we break it down into sentences, and it seems to be, I don't know, they just seem to find it easier like that. So it might be just the way they perceive it. Looking for understanding, again, your mini whiteboard, cold calling, process questions. Visualiser. Now, I often use Visualiser also when I do live marking. So, for example, we have done piece of assessment, like you can see on the right-hand side. I think there was year 7's just done it before autumn half term. So we've done only about, you know, 6 weeks, 7 weeks of German. And I had just picked some to mark under Visualiser, where the rest of the class was marking alongside. So as we were marking and I was finding some mistakes, I was asking students, okay, well, why is this not right? So things like capital letters, or maybe spelling, EIs, IEs, or verb endings, or word order. So checking that they understand why is it not correct as well, you know, and ensuring that they understand what they need to do, and also modeling the task, how the task is approached. So you could also, obviously, when you mark your book, you know, whole class feedback, things which went well, because students need to know what they do well, what they don't do well, where the gaps are, in order to move them forward. Now, metacognition. I think metacognition is very important. Obtaining high success rates. I often, when we approach tasks, I model to students how to approach the task. So I don't just get ideas. Again, this would be done under a Visualiser for me, for example. So I wouldn't just get them, give me ideas, what shall I write? I would actually dissect the task. So we would look at, okay, what is the topic? We would look at the bullet points. We would make notes by each of the bullet point. Okay, well, this one needs past tense, this one needs future tense, this is an opinion. So I would get students, I'm a Germanist, for example, so in tenses, when we talk about past tense, we know that we need past tense. We use, probably some of you might know, we use a burger to help with the word order. So I get my students to draw a tiny little burger somewhere on the side, so they can remember how the words go in a sentence, you know, having the past participle at the end. Same when we're using while. Verb has to go at the end, so remembering where it goes. So write a model structure as a reminder. For past tense, maybe jot some past participles around, and then think about, am I using sein or am I using haben? Is it a verb of movement or it isn't? So planning, you know, planning the stage, how you will do it, and then draw some ideas, examples from students to do a model writing, for example. And then after they've done the model writing, do again checks. Okay, have I added detail? What have I, you know, have I checked my spelling? Have I checked my word order? And then that model example would go away, and then students would tackle the task later on independently. So going through this metacognitive process of planning it and me thinking aloud what I would do, it's very useful to students. And I have more questions now asking, well, where am I writing what, and what do I write here? Because it is modeled, and it's modeled directly on that sheet they have to answer, which sometimes I find students find it difficult to transfer what you put on the whiteboard onto the sheet of paper you want them to complete the task. So when you do it directly on a sheet, you know, you want them to complete the task, there is less confusion. So, you know, fostering this I can culture and the high expectations. And as I said, embracing mistakes during learning process is so important, making sure that the classroom environment feels safe for the students to take risks. Because when we started to use cold calling, oh, it was a little bit, I'm not comfortable with it. Students were all panicking about it. So making sure that, yes, it's okay. If you don't know it, that's not a problem. If you make a mistake, again, no problem. We make mistakes. You know, it's important. So making sure that students can be successful and have that feeling of self-efficacy, because yes, I can do it. It does really impact massively on the motivation and engagement. So I share often with my students work, you know, whether it is absolutely perfect work or not, you know, work is shared, celebrated, successes are celebrated. So students, you know, how well they're doing, praise cards are sent home, certificates are sent home, students are mentioned in assemblies, and that's not just for academic achievement, it's also for effort and work ethic. Right, providing scaffold for difficult tasks. I think again, many of them interlink in my thinking. You know, we're providing scaffolds all the time. You know, it's breaking things into chunks also means providing scaffolds. So your live modeling using templates such as structure strips or the translation grids. But what we have to remember also with this is that we have to remember to withdraw this scaffolding, you know, gradually, so we don't end up with students just relying on the scaffold all the time. So some of the examples, you can see the structure strips break down a little bit and help some of the students to plan it. Your high achievers, your high attainers might not need this. they don't need it at all. But you might have your lower attainers or lower prior attainers or students who find it difficult. They will benefit it because it gives them a bit of a structure and lay it out. And again, the structure strips eventually go away. I mean, my year 11s, for example, don't use them anymore, but we use them in year 10. The box translation where you provide the first letter, I found it more cognitively friendly than just having a letter and a line, because it's more confusing. And yes, I might have given them the words with the correct word order, but they still have to think, oh, that word goes there because it's a verb. So it's still challenging as well, in a sense. And then you've got some of the examples of the oral scaffolds. I think the oral scaffold is from Gianfranco Conti, and the structure strip, I think, was Morgan MFL as well. So 9, requiring, and monitoring independent practice. So languages, as mentioned, combining knowledge and skill, that helps to build proficiency. So input, practice. So students have to have plenty of opportunity to practice in order to support the fluency. And we often do that, and I just circle around the classroom and monitor. If anybody needs help, I give the support where needed. But I think the worst things sometimes we do, because of the time restrictions we have as teachers, we have to cover lots of content and we haven't got a lot of time on a timetable, is moving too soon onto production. And that's where sometimes the failures happen, because we have moved too fast onto the production phase. So making sure that students can practice independently as well after we have guided them, after we have modeled, is important. So these are some examples. I think these are for speaking. So you've got board games. The one on the right is from Teaching Languages. Again, just make it a little bit more fun, engaging. Sometimes we use even dice for some of these games. So students do like it because it's just not just kind of boring sitting, me asking question, give answer. So they can work together. And finally, engaging, obviously, in weekly and monthly reviews. Again, that ties up with the principle 1, really, like retrieving, activating prior knowledge. So spacing and interleaving your ritual practice, using quizzes. People often want to use multiple choice quizzes. I know other subjects use them a lot. I don't use them as much in my lessons, but I know that there are colleagues who do use them. Thing to remember is really that if we choose to use multiple choice quizzes to give incorrect but plausible answers, because if we give them a choice which is obviously wrong, then it's not really a lot of challenge in there. There is not a lot of desirable difficulty. We want the learning to be, challenging, to challenge the students so they can remember it. And then we have the variety of assessments, whether it is formative or whether it is summative assessments. I mean, us personally, we do summative assessments 3 times a year, 1 in autumn, 1 in spring, and 1 in summer. But we do a lot of assessment for learning, formative assessment, and then providing effective and meaningful feedback. So if I have marked an assessment, I would not give a lot of targets. I would pick maybe 1 or 2, which are the most common, because I want my students to remember that mistake they have made, and I don't want them to do it again. But if I give them too many targets, it's just difficult to concentrate on it, so give 1 or 2 targets achievable. So examples of retrieval. Okay, so one which is still multiple choice, but it's still challenging, so it's not giving them bluntly easy answers. And then just to wrap it up, just to show you, this is from Inner Drive, how the cognitive science behind the Rosensheim principle instructions. So you can see the instructions on the right, 1 to 10, and then how they tie up with the cognitive science of retrieval practice, the spacing, the interleaving, considering the cognitive load theory, your growth mindset, and metacognition and resilience. I think they are very, very interleaved and really useful to know and take into account as a practitioner when we want our students to learn the most they can, so reach their potential. I'm just looking at the time. I think I have got about 6-7 minutes. So if I go quickly into question and answer sessions. So, hi Suva, this is great. There is so much. Are you able to show a presentation? Yes, absolutely. If you drop me an email, that is not a problem. So I can you know, share presentation. That is not a problem. If you look on the slides, there is my email address. Just drop me an email and I will send it back to you. Hi Suva, is the Excel spreadsheet of chunks with random quizzes available? Yes, there is. There are spreadsheets on my blog. So if you look, you've got at the bottom of the screen my blog email address. If you go into the resource page, you've got lots of resources that I have shared, and there's also the spreadsheet with the retrieval roulettes, okay, for quite a few. So if you download it, you can use what is in there, or you can put your own you know, vocabulary in. But also you can drop me an email. I can then share with you, I think Jane Bassett, who is a French teacher. She's a head of French in a school in head of languages in a school in London. She has created a Wakelet where lots of people put spreadsheets for other languages as well, for German, Spanish, and French as well. So if you drop me an email, I can then send you the link to the Wakelet, because I don't think I'm going to have time now to search it and type it in, unless Joe Dale is around in the chat, and he is usually very good with that, and he can maybe post the link in the chat. Can you please clarify what you mean by listening pyramid? Thank you. Listening pyramid is what we do is there are some on my resource page where you can download template, but basically what it is a pyramid which has got a chunked sentence. So you're starting with a smaller chunk and building over, and then you got the recording. So what the students do, I play the recording of each chunk, and students write what they hear on their mini whiteboards, and every time adding a new chunk to it. So it's almost like a dictation, but it's through the recording. So because often we know that when we say it, we slow things down, and it's easier for students to write when we speak naturally, and it's different when it's recorded. But there is a template for listening pyramids again on my resource page on my blog. So if you want to have a look and download, you can just put your own recordings on there. You can have a look at what sentences are in there, depending what you teach. What are mini whiteboards? They are like these plastic mini boards students have, and they have a black pen marker, and they can write their answers on. So they are just erased ones. So they write their answer, and then they just show them to the teacher. So it's like a plastic whiteboard, mini little one, and they just write their answers, whatever you ask them to do, and then they show it to you when you ask them to show it to you. Could we have access? Yes, you can have access to my presentation. If you drop me an email, then I'm really, Waggles is what a good one looks like. Okay, so that's what Waggle. Also, we are using new textbooks. Okay, content is overloaded in that book. We struggle with the content of the textbooks. Any suggestions? Now, we loosely follow a course book, Stimmt, which is in German, but I have just taken most important information out of that, and we have created our own resources. I'm quite lucky because we are quite good in our department, and we share. So everybody did for 1 year group. So it might be worth looking and adapting, because we don't use textbook anymore. So it is laborsome. There is a bit of work to be done, but I think that works for our student better. We used to use a book, and it was like a couple of pages over a couple of lessons, and it was just too fast, and students could not retain, and they struggled. So we have used, luckily, the lockdown to look at it and restructure things. If you want to change, I would maybe suggest do it 1 year at a time. So maybe start with year 7 and build it over the years, so the workload is manageable, because obviously we're back to full-time teaching. We all have so much to do. And maybe just share, if you have a department who is happy to share, maybe everybody does 1 unit, and then it's manageable. I'm just quickly going to have a look at the chat. Yes, I think Joe just posted the Wakelet link in there. So thank you very much, Joe, for that. Yes, I'm just looking at the chat. I think we've got, I don't know what time we've got. Any more questions? I think we are literally 2 minutes. If anybody's got any more questions or any more comments, feel free to type in a chat. Otherwise, I think we will be soon finishing. Okay, please, can you display your email again? Can you not see my board, my screen? At the bottom, there is a ribbon, and you can see my Twitter handle, my blog link, and at the bottom also my email address is like a blue ribbon. I'm not sure. It's not clear on this screen. Okay, let me just type in my so it's sylvia.basto@gmail.com. Okay, I'm just sending it to you. I will pop it also in the chat, and I will also pop into chat my blog. Okay. Paste, and I will put also the blog. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just looking at some of the posts. Thank you. Right, so it's okay. I have just posted in my blog page as well. So if because as I said on the resource page, there is a lot of resources on there. So ready to adapt to any language. So it's really easy. So yeah, I'm just looking at thing. Thank you so much for your feedback, guys. I'm just looking at some of the posts. Thank you so much. I hope it wasn't information overload because we had, as mentioned, 45 minutes. So hopefully it wasn't too much at once and it wasn't too rushed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think I will finish so the other speaker can join. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will be leaving. Okay, so hopefully, thank you. The recording will be, I think, posted to you via link. Okay, so they will post you the recording. Okay, I'm just looking and there is some questions here. Recording will be posted via link after this presentation because they're recording it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Really enjoyed it. Please that you enjoyed it too. Thank you. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you.